Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are going over one of my last but favorite reads of 2025. I know we're in 2026 now. However, I have fallen behind when it comes to recording my videos. So we are going to talk about this book. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I love this book so much. So much happened so fast. I couldn't bring myself to put this book down. And this book is Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mas. If you love fantasy romance, hit that subscribe button down below and just have a good time together. As usual, here on Dragon's Horde, we will be going into our cover review first, and then we will get into all of the other good bits that I have for today. So for our cover review, the cover itself of Blood of Hercules is very minimalistic. It's eye-catching, but like I said, very minimalistic. And I'm going to tell you why it worked for you to at least pick it up if you didn't decide to buy it after picking it up and looking at it. So this cover has a very minimalistic design to it, but at the same time, that minimalistic design is different than what we're seeing with all of the other books. It has a lot of negative space. So most of the cover is just the background color, which we see in the picture that's floating around up here. And the other thing too is that it has a very light aspect to it. So most of the fantasy books that we've been seeing, they are dark toned. They have dark greens, brown, black, gray. There's a lot of gray and black. But this cover is different because this cover is essentially entirely white. So because of that, it stands out from all of the other books that we can see when we go book shopping, or even when we're looking through the Kindle books or ebooks. This is not sponsored. I wish. Maybe someday. So because of that difference, it draws you in. It pulls you in to see, okay, why is this so different? Because if you see a lot of dark things and then the white's just there, it's like almost like a light because it is reflecting light more than the black will. Black absorbs light. Anyhow, on this cover we do have what appears to be a lot of little vines with roses on it, but they aren't open roses. They're closed. They're like rosebuds. And they're golden. So they're golden roses on this white background. And then there is one that looks like it has a little bitty teeny tiny drop of blood falling off of it. The font choice for the title is bold and sharp with defined edges, but it's done in gold. And it's a pale gold, so it's not overwhelming. It doesn't overpower the white background. And underneath all of the lettering for the title, we do have the silhouette of a girl. So it's essentially just the outline that's completely colored in, but there's enough detail that we can see she's holding a spear, she's wearing a Spartan helmet, and of course this silhouette is also done in the same light gold color as the title is. And then of course there's the darker aspects of the rose vines, the author's name, those are a little bit darker, not overpowering so. I like how this cover is different than others, but it doesn't do so by being so ostentatious. You're just like, ew, why all of this extra stuff that we don't need? Why does it look gaudy? No, this looks very clean, it's very aesthetic. And the other thing too that's interesting about this is because it's white, then that gives a big juxtaposition of what the contents of the book are, because usually we associate white with purity, cleanliness, things like that. When we know the contents of this book, it being a dark fantasy romance, there's probably going to be some blood, there's going to be war, things might get messy. So I really like those clashing concepts. I give this cover 4 out of 5. I like it, but there are others I like more. So 4 out of 5 stars. Very good. Very nice. Alright, so now we're going to try to go into a brief synopsis. I do have a lot to say about this book, so I'm going to do our little chapters, I suppose, a little bit differently than what I've been doing. So Blood of Hercules is a dark fantasy romance set in a futuristic post-apocalyptic world where the world itself is overrun with monsters, and these monsters are known as titans. The titans just wreak havoc on everything, they kill everything, they are bad. However, even though we do have the titans in this world, we also have the Greek gods and demigods. Even though we have demigods in this world, they are not known as demigods. They have different terms assigned to them. Now, some of these demigods that are present in this world, they are assigned to fight the titans, to protect the humans from the titans. Because like I said, the titans, they're running around, they're causing mayhem, they're murdering humans, wreaking havoc on everything. And because of the titans, when they appeared, it nearly caused society to completely collapse. Now, the demigods in this world, it's very rare, but sometimes when a demigod child is born, they are abandoned by the human parent because that human parent just wanted the bragging rights of having slept with one of the gods. So they never intended to go through with having the child or raising that child. The child is left alone. And because of this occurrence, then on any child's 19th birthday, when they finish high school, they must take a test. And this test is meant to see if they are able to go to one of the last remaining 3 higher education universities that exist in the world. And for our protagonist in this story, this would significantly change her life. This would change her life, this would change her brother's life if she got that opportunity. However, when students finish this test, they're supposed to like put a little drop of blood onto a couple of circles at the end end of the test. And this is meant to see if this person, this child that's taking the test, is 100% human, or perhaps are they demigods? What's going on here? Because of this, our protagonist does this, and then things happen very quickly, and she is thrust into a whole different world than what she's used to. And because of that, there is training that she has to go through. For the demigods, they aren't automatically given their immortal status. No, they have to be at least 21, complete something that is known as the crucible, those kinds of things. So that is where we get started, and where our protagonist begins to meet her love interests, go through some trials, things like that. All right, so that is all for our pretty non-spoiler review. It is short. I don't want to say more because there's a lot we need to go over, and I'd rather go over everything in our now detailed spoilery reviews. So if you don't want spoilers, either skip this or come back to it later, or just stop watching now, because there's a lot I'm going to go over, and I will spoil pretty much everything in the book. So we begin reading a little bit confusedly. We begin reading about the Oracle. So the Oracle, as we know, is a future seer. They can see what goes on in the future. They're tied to fate. It's a little bit confusing when you start. I was confused. And as we meet the Oracle, we also get our first glimpse of the gods. So we kind of think that that's where the story is really going to begin, but it's not. That's just an introduction, so we know, hey, these guys exist. After that, after we see what happens with the Oracle and the gods, then we get a time skip, and we meet our female main character. Her name is Alexis Hurt. She is a math nerd foster child, and she is living in a rundown trailer park with abusive foster parents. And by abusive, I mean abusive. So another thing I'd like to go over is, if there are things that you are sensitive to, please go over the trigger warnings before watching this or before reading this book. There are a lot of dark aspects to it. As I mentioned previously, this is a dark fantasy romance, so just take care with that, because this book does touch many heavy concepts. So her foster parents, they go as far as tying her up, beating her, starving her, doing all these crazy, terrible things while they're off getting high off a special drink that they make to stave off starvation. And supposedly it's made with various cleaning supplies, household chemicals, things like that. We meet Alexis when she's tied up, and she escapes out of her bindings and goes to a pasture and is just enjoying the sun, even though she has injured herself, and becomes friends with a giant, invisible, venomous snake with purple eyes. So just from the things that we glean from reading the first 2 chapters of this book, it does seem like we are going to touch a lot of heavy topics that are modern day problems that we see on the news or hear on the radio, things like that, or social media. So it seems like this author wanted to touch on these topics, and she wanted to expose them and explore them, but she did so through creative writing because of all the implications that these topics do have. And she did it in a very masterful and creative way. It was very interesting to see that she included all of these aspects, these heavy topics, in a way that portrayed what it really is, while still including it within a fantasy world. But it does make it harder to swallow when you realize these are real everyday problems that we face in our world, and it makes it a lot harder to swallow, a lot harder to consume this content. And these first few chapters are hard to swallow. They are painful. It hurts. If you have any bit of empathy at all, these chapters they're hurtful. It's crushing. Will you cry? Maybe, because I did. Trust me, maybe, probably. So as I mentioned before, just please look at the trigger warnings, because I know this will be very difficult for many people to swallow. And if you decided to continue with this after checking out the trigger warnings and everything, then I invite you to continue with us into the plunge of this analysis that I have. When Alexis reaches the age of 11, and her younger foster brother that was brought to her foster parents later on in Alexis's life after she'd been with them for a while, he's now 10, they're sleeping, or they're supposed to be sleeping, and they tend to sleep, I think it was in a cardboard box inside the trailer in a corner somewhere. But Alexis rarely sleeps. She rarely sleeps, so she's awake, and she hears her foster parents talking about how they need to get rid of Charlie because they are all starving. Winter has been much harsher than it has in the previous years. They have in this world something that would be like food stamps, and there aren't enough rations for everyone. So they are starving. So they're trying to figure out how to survive, and their option is, let's get rid of the smallest one here. It's not like the government comes and checks on him anyway. He is disposable. So Alexis does what she can as an 11-year-old, skinny, starving girl to protect her foster brother, because she loves him dearly. From the time that he was left on their doorstep, she has loved Charlie. So she wakes him up and she makes him get into the bathroom and lock the door. And she tells him, whenever everything's over, use the emergency phone that is in the bathroom to call out the responders. And these emergency phones are supposed to be installed in everyone's house somewhere because of the Titans. The only time the responders come out immediately is when it's a Titan attack. However, if it's anything domestic or anything like that, then they won't come out until after everything has been said and done. So they'll just come out pretty much as a cleanup crew. And after she gets Charlie into the bathroom, she then confronts her foster parents. And she tells them, if you want him, you have to go through me. And they then proceed to act like rabid animals and attack her. And they're just beating her in the face, in the head. They keep hitting her over and over again, especially her foster mother. And remember the purple snake that she had befriended? The purple snake lives with her. The purple snake is usually either wrapped around her neck, not choking her, like a scarf, or around her waist, just so Alexis can carry her around. This snake, her name is Nyx, and she is Alexis's best friend. So when all of this is going down, Nyx usually goes out at night to hunt, because obviously she has to eat too. So she goes out at night to hunt, so she wasn't with Alexis when all of this started. But she comes back, like after they've gotten started fighting with Alexis, and Nyx desperately wants to get in. She is screaming at Alexis, open the door, let me in, let me help you. And Alexis is trying to get to the door, but her foster parents won't let her get to the door. So while this is going on, Nyx manages to fly through the kitchen window. She breaks it and comes in. And with the commotion of the breaking glass, Alexis takes that opportunity after they've bashed her in the face and the head multiple times, grabs Nyx, and runs into the bathroom with Charlie and locks them all in there. So after all of this, after they've hit her and everything, there's blood everywhere. Alexis is kind of noticing she's having some issues. Then her foster parents begin beating on the door, trying to get her to open it up, let them in to come out. Like, why would I? And then all of a sudden, Alexis's foster father is pleading with her to open the door to use the emergency phone to call out the responders because her foster mother is foaming at the mouth. She's being attacked by an invisible force. But alas, Alexis doesn't move. And then after everything is said and done, the neighbors do end up calling out the responders. They eventually show up. There's policemen, there's medics, the usual. The responders are taking a look at Alexis, trying to clean up her wounds, kind of. The medic was a real asswipe. I hated her. The policeman isn't much better, but he does ask Alexis, who killed your foster mother? Was it really a Titan? Or was it your foster father over there? And Alexis just looks at him and says, our foster mother was killed by our foster father, and he is forever taken away to be locked away in the prison. So Charlie and Alexis's main problem for the moment is out of the way. However, they will now face new challenges. So they are left alone after all of the responders leave, Alexis, Nyx, and Charlie, and they try to go to sleep, finally. But while they're trying to sleep, someone shows up to take their trailer away. So because their foster father was deeming that it was a Titan attack, they consider it to be contaminated. And because they take away their trailer, now Alexis and Charlie are homeless. So now we go through another time jump. Now we see Alexis, and she is, instead of it being a year time jump, now it's an 8-year time jump. So Alexis is now 19, Charlie is 18, and Alexis is on the verge of finishing school, but not really because she's already finished. But in this post-apocalyptic world, children cannot work until after they've taken the test at their 19 years of age. It's crazy. Yeah, they can't work. They can't make any income at all. So over the past few years, she's just spent her time going to school, one, so she could be warm, two, in self-study, trying to prepare herself for this big test to try to get into one of the last remaining higher education universities in the world. And this test is known as the Spartan test. Now, it's been about 8 years, and Alexis, Charlie, and Nyx are still homeless. They've created pretty much a cardboard box fort. They really don't have access to personal hygiene or anything like that. They will try to bathe in streams or rivers if there's water available. However, if it's the winter, you're not going to want to do that because you're going to get hypothermic and you're going to die. So they really just try to clean up as they can. And this is brought out by one of Alexis's classmates. Her name is Jessica. She's a real biatch. She's being a loudmouth, gesturing ridiculously, sniffing profusely as she moves away from Alexis while she gossips loudly to her surrounding friends about the smell. And as she's just going on and on, someone finally interrupts because they say, there's an update from the Crimson Duo. And the Crimson Duo, they are two of the demigods, Petro and Achilles. And then we're told the only thing that gets humans more excited than seeing the Crimson Duo fight is the Spartan Gladiator competition, which is held every 3 years. And this is where we have chthonic Spartans and dark creatures fight each other. and sometimes fight titans that they've captured and put into the competition, but we're not worried about that right now. After this, we do get another little time skip, and we actually get to see Alexis as she is taking her Spartan merits test. She's all hyped up on adrenaline. She's telling us about halfway through that now they're asking for all the answers to be submitted in Latin, so she's trying to figure out how to translate quarks, of all things, into Latin, and she's just having a hard time trying to figure it out, but she's doing her best. She doesn't exactly call them quarks. I think she calls it something like small something. After everyone's done with their test or when the timer's up, there's a teacher that begins to go around picking up everybody's tests, asking how they feel about it, things like that. So it is taking a minute. And while she's picking up these tests, she's also checking to make sure that everyone's placed their little drops of blood onto the little circles at the end of the test, like I mentioned previously. But when she gets to Alexis, she says, "Oh, hold on, you didn't put your little drops of blood on here. I need you to do that for me real quick." So Alexis obliges, of course, because she really wants to get into this university to change her and Charlie and Nix's life. So when she does that, the paper starts smoking. When the paper starts smoking, the teacher's face just completely loses all color. She's in shock. She then goes to the principal, who's at the front of the room, lets him know, and he's like, "Well, we've got to call a protocol." So they do that. And while he's calling in the protocol on the emergency phone that they have at the front of the room, the paper completely disintegrates. Her test, all of her hard work, her quarks translation, everything gone. Is hashes now. And as that happens, then we were told that there's an explosion outside. But what that explosion is are two Goliaths essentially teleporting to that location to confirm that it's actually Alexis's blood that caused the paper to burn up. And when they get inside and they realize that Alexis is actually a girl and not a boy, they then begin to go on and on and on about how they're sure she acquired Spartan blood illegally because she wants to get close to the Crimson Duo, because that's all girls want to do. They just want to get in with the Crimson Duo. And they continue to tell her all of these things and talk to her like she's trash, like she's worthless, no good for anything, capital offense punishable by death, after which they then proceed to inject some silver substance into her arm that they explain this is actually enough purified adrenaline to kill a Cyclops. Okay. And she should be dead at least in the next 3 minutes. When I read this, I knew she wasn't going to die, but still, the way the scene is written, it did give me anxiety reading it. And it was so hard not to skip ahead. I managed somehow miraculously. I loved it though. So while we're waiting for Alexis just to keel over, the Goliaths continue to talk trash about her being a stupidly infatuated girl. But after the 3 minutes had passed, then the Goliaths began to reel because they're like, "Oh my god, she's not dead." And they then begin to ask, "Okay, have you ever been associated with any of the chthonic houses, creatures, titans, any Spartan houses at all?" And she's like, no. All the while she's thinking, "Well, I live in a box. How do you expect me to be associated with any of them?" And they then proceed to grab her and whisk her away to the Spartan War Academy. As they jump places, Alexis realizes, "Oh my god, I am now in a giant stadium. People are chanting, and they're chanting in Latin. They are chanting Amor fati memento mori. Amor fati memento mori." So we do get a lot of quotes, a lot of little tidbits, stuff like that in Latin throughout this book. I thought that was really cool. And what they're chanting is, "Remember death, love your fate. Remember death, love your fate." So that's pretty interesting. So as the spectators are chanting this, Alexis realizes that she is standing in the Dolomites Colosseum in Rome. And she is now set to participate in what's known as the massacre, which is where they gather all of these 19-year-olds who fight each other and see who comes out on top. I believe there's supposed to be 10 of them in total that come out as the victors. They're supposed to fight each other to the death if they wish to live and if they wish to pass on into the next phase of becoming a Spartan, which is known as the Crucible. This is where the majority of our book takes place, is the Crucible. So to understand the sheer absurdity of this, let's just take a second to remember everything that is Alexis. Alexis is untrained, underweight, underfed, most likely dehydrated, and has just been shoved into a whole new phase of her life in an arena. She has no idea what's going on. So it's just absurd to think that she would even be able to get past this massacre. But she somehow survives. Of course, she has Nyx wrapped around her neck like a scarf. And Nyx does help her. So it's not just Alexis that takes down. Well, no, it's also Nyx. Nyx is the one that helps her survive and get through this. And there are bodies everywhere. The remaining contestants, they're all bloody, they're beat up, they're injured. tortured. Most of their clothes are either torn or basically torn off or burnt off. And once all of this killing is done, Zeus announces the name of each of the survivor and who their mentors are going to be. And their mentors are meant to support them and help give them tips to try to get through the crucible, because it's going to be a grueling experience. And also to house and feed them on the days that they do get a break from this training that they're about to go through. All of the other contestants, they get one mentor. Alexis, however, gets two. She gets Petro and Achilles as her mentors. And as we were seeing previously, they were watching an update of the Crimson Duo. Alexis was terrified of them, so she's still terrified of them now. This is where I really got engrossed in the story, and I could not put it down. I stopped taking as in-depth notes, so I kind of just read in big chunks and then wrote down what I could remember. So now it will be a little bit vaguer. So after she survives this massacre, Alexis is taken back to Petro and Achilles' house, where they nurse her back to health before she's supposed to start the crucible. There are doctors looking over her, they're looking after her, they're giving her medicines. And of course, as they're trying to examine her, because of her childhood PTSD with everything that happened with her foster parents, Alexis is not keen on being touched by anyone, mainly because she always expected some type of physical harm to come to her. So after Alexis is finally examined, the doctor goes and tells Petro and Achilles she has so many broken bones. Not all of them are fresh, some of them are old, they're healed up, but there are so many. Her mentors, of course, they're like the tough guys, the top guys. They aren't happy about this. They believe Alexis is weak, they believe she's an Olympian mutt, because that's what demigods are called. She only survived the massacre because of sheer unadulterated dumb luck, and will die during her first 2 weeks of the crucible. That is what they believe. So once Alexis is finally conscious again, Petro and Achilles explain to Alexis what exactly the crucible is, and it's meant to push Spartans past their breaking point to see if they're truly worthy of actually becoming immortal or not. Then we get another time jump and we see once her 2 weeks of recuperation is up, then she's supposed to begin the crucible, and they take her and leave her at the Spartan War Academy, of course, and she is left under General Cleandro's care. General Cleandro is basically the overseer of all of the classes that they will be going through. He's the one that's going to be keeping an eye on them, deciding do they need to be punished, do they not, those kinds of things. I honestly found General Cleandro basically to be a crazy old geezer, but he was pretty funny. And he does, of course, give a tour of where these initiates will be spending all of their time during the crucible, and explaining what the crucible is and what they're going to be doing. So this is a quote from what General Cleandro said: "Humans take 8 weeks to heal a single broken bone. They can also only go 21 days without food, 10 days without sleep, and only 3 days without water." So he doesn't really like humans, because Spartans see themselves as more than humans, which obviously they have powers and they can do all these other things. "Unlike humans," he said, "Spartans can live forever. We heal bones in 2 weeks. We can go 60 days without food, 30 days without sleep, and 2 entire weeks without a single drop of water." So essentially, the crucible is meant to push the initiates beyond their capacities as far as they know. So they are going to push them into sleep deprivation, they're going to push them to the brink of starvation, all the while they're going to be overloading them with information, because they are going to be taking classes during this time while they're being kept awake, while they aren't being fed, while they aren't being given water. And the crucible itself is supposed to provide mental fortitude for these initiates, which I can understand. I understand the concept that they're going through of being pushed beyond their limits. I do understand that the time frames are exaggerated just because we are in a fantastical world and no human could achieve these time frames, but that's the point, because essentially this is just taking military training and pushing it beyond human limits. And the initiates, they have to make it, they have to survive from August until the following January. So remember I said they'd be going through classes? Well, throughout the classes, the instructors will be asking questions. If the initiates don't answer these questions correctly, then they will have to run what is known as the circuit. And this is a grueling hours-long run up and down a mountain, and then they have to swim across the river Styx, and they have to do this all while they avoid General Charon. So he, of course, is in his little boat, he's patrolling, he's trying to capture the initiates as they're trying to swim across this river, because if he catches you, one, you're disqualified, but you're disqualified because you're dead. And the classes that they're supposed to take, they're pretty straightforward. The first one is Pythagorean. So if we remember, Alexis is a math nerd, she loves math. Pythagorean is just advanced math. The other class is is lost classical lore. So this is pretty straightforward. It's basically Greek mythology on steroids. And the last one is defense and power. This is a bit harder to summarize as far as like the name pretty much explains it in general. It mostly focuses on meditation and then getting the initiates to figure out what their power is, being able to activate it and use it, and also bonding with an animal protector. So they do have familiars in this world. But once the initiates have been debriefed, then they all go on their first circuit run, and everyone's doing okay. Everyone except Alexis, of course. And remember, Alexis has this giant invisible snake wrapped around her. Nyx is said to weigh about 30 pounds. So if you could imagine a skinny girl, she's had 2 weeks to kind of eat, try to put on some weight. She's probably not done much as far as physical activity goes. She gets tired extremely fast. Then you add 30 pounds, that's going to be tough. As the weeks begin to wear on, we are slowly but surely losing initiates. Alexis believes she is slipping into insanity because of the sleep deprivation, and of course the sheer mental overload from all of these classes, as well as the physical exertion of having to run the circuit between everything that's going on. Sometimes initiates have to run it more than once a day because sometimes people mess up, and she believes she's going insane because she's hearing voices that aren't really there. As this story progresses, we do see more and more clues about whose heritage Alexis could have, as far as who her parent could be as far as the gods go. We also see her mentors and her professors begin to get more and more protective of her. And we only see that through the changing POVs, because this story does change its POV, so it's not just Alexis' POV. Alexis believes they are picking on her and singling her out, just one, because she's a girl, and two, because they assume she's weaker than the others. However, if we see it from her professor's point of view, it's completely different, and they're like, why won't she let us protect her? So that's contrasting. She believes they want to kill her. They're trying to keep her alive. It's hilarious. Once the initiates finally make it to the ball at the end of January, everyone is so relieved that they have made it. They're alive. They're going to become Spartans. They aren't going to have to be sleep deprived anymore. They are so happy. I would be too. And while the festivities are going, then it seems that there's an attack, and someone comes and grabs Alexis with Nyx wrapped around her shoulders and grabs her friend Helen, and then they're teleported away and into an unknown location. So when Alexis finally regains consciousness, she is highly displeased to find herself bound, and that their kidnapper is actually the heir to the house of Zeus. Now it turns out this heir is kind of crazy because he wants all of the power and the glory, and he has been slowly killing off all of the other initiates left and right. So while the Spartans were thinking, hey, our initiates are sucking, all of our demigods are sucking, what's going on here? It's just been this guy, and he's been everybody. So as he explains to Alexis what he's been doing, he begins beating on the metal and just making a lot of noise, attracting titans because they're in a titan heavy zone. That way it's the titans that murder them and not him, so he can claim innocence. After he leaves in her desperation, Alexis destroys her hands trying to get out of the bindings, and she does manage it. Runs to Helen to try to help her. Helen tells her, I have a dagger strapped to my leg. Alexis can barely hold it, but she manages to get it. She manages to free Helen, and just at that time, there is a titan that comes bursting in. As the titan bursts in, she stabs it in the eyeball and then slams its head in the door, and she has never teleported herself or anyone or anything anywhere ever before. They've only gone over the concept of it in Defense and Power, but using her little bit of knowledge of what they're supposed to do, she does her best and she teleports them the heck out of there. Now, when she teleports them to the Colosseum, and when they get there, all of the other initiates that had survived, they're waiting graduation ceremony to commence. Helen, of course, is extremely distraught because Helen has been raised as a pampered princess all of her life. She's never had any hardships or struggles or anything similar in the least as to what Alexis has gone through. Helen's always been shielded by her brother and all of the other chthonic men because they believe it's important to protect and shield women, and that women should not be exposed to all of this hardship, all of the pain, everything like that. However, because of everything that she was put through, Alexis is now hell-bent on murdering the heir of Zeus. And this is one of my favorite parts of the book. It's right here when Alexis gives in to her rage and desire to murder this heir, because we finally find out who her godly parent is. And we finally learn that she is not just some random lost mutt, but rather she is an heir to the chthonic house. So this is what happened. It was originally believed she was murdered during a titan attack when she was a baby. And at the very beginning of the book, we had the clue right in front of our face. We just didn't know. At the beginning, we're were only told the only possession she had as a child was a onesie, and it had 8 letters written across the chest. Can you guess what those letters are? Because I didn't. It turns out those 8 letters spelled Hercules, and that was her true name. And as Hercules, I know if you know Greek mythology, you'll think, oh, she's the daughter of Zeus. Wrong, not here. She is actually the daughter of Hades and Persephone in this world. Did that bother me? Yes, it did, but I enjoyed the story, so I kind of forgave it because I think of her more as Alexis than Hercules, because that's how we knew her throughout the entire book. And because she's daughter to Hades and Persephone, that makes her the conic heir to the house of Hades, and she's also female, and it's very rare for there to be any conic females born, so she's something else. From this point, after going through the Crucible, I think the Crucible was probably my favorite little section of the book. Everything moves forward pretty quickly. There was an underlying plot to kind of manipulate her into an arranged marriage to help the other chthonic house heirs so they wouldn't have to marry a weak Olympian. So they did that. She unknowingly accepted their proposal because she didn't know the ways of the Olympians, the gods, anything like that. She's unfamiliar with their culture, so when they gave her gift, one, they didn't give it to her personally. It was just left where she would find it. It was a box. So she, of course, opened this box, and in this concept, if you open it, then you're accepting the proposal. What she should have done in this case was find out who the box was from before opening. So that was the manipulation that they used. However, they said that she accepted it because she didn't know better. But who else knew that? Nobody, just them and her. And we get to see that she goes back. She sees Charlie. They accept Charlie because she's like, I'm not going back with you. I won't marry you if you don't take Charlie out of here. He needs a better life. So they take Charlie back. They take her with them. She gets married. It's a whole shebang ordeal. We see that Alexis, now that she knows she has a kind of power, we see true feminine rage. So I'm really hoping that for Bonds of Hercules, we can see just how far she goes, how deeply she goes into the feminine rage. That is my hope for. And we also find out as this book ends that Alexis must now compete in the Spartan gladiator competition that's coming up and join the Assembly of Death and fight the Titans. And that just wraps up everything that Blood of Hercules goes over. I did, of course, leave out a few itsy bitsy details that you'll appreciate once you read this story. And like I said, this book for me was so good. While I was reading it, I couldn't put it down. It just kept me hooked. I stayed up way too late, but while I was reading, it was totally worth it. And there are a lot of scenes that evoke a lot of deep emotions throughout this book. So you'll either cry of laughter or you'll cry of pain, either of the two. All right, so now that we've gone through 2 synopsises, one very basic and one a little bit more detailed, now I want to go over my thoughts and opinions in general for this book. I know this is going to be a long review. So let me tell you how this book had me in a chokehold. The story, riveting. The setup, dark, but it keeps you in the chokehold. And it keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. This book is dark in ways that you wouldn't expect, and as I mentioned previously, it touches on and exposes a lot of heavy topics that not many people want to even consider touching on, namely drug abuse, domestic violence, starvation, abuse of power, economic inequality, murder, among other things. There are other things that I've probably forgotten to mention. As I said previously, I do recommend that you go over the trigger warnings just to ensure, are you comfortable reading this or would you rather skip out on it? Like, I hear trigger warning, I'm like, oh, I wonder what's on the trauma menu for today. But that's just me. I don't know. That's just my dark humor coming out of me, I guess. So this book does a good job at exposing the truth of domestic abuse, and that it's typically seen in predominantly lower socioeconomic households, as well as how starvation typically affects that socioeconomic bracket. And it even goes further in depth, exposing that what decisions need to be made when faced with starvation. What are the decisions that the people are going to make depending on who's around them? How is that going to affect their household? And the way this is portrayed, we don't look at the morality of the decision. We don't look at, is this right or wrong? Should I do it? Should I not? No, we look at the self-preservation aspect of it, of if I do this, then I might survive a little bit longer. If I don't do this, then I'm going to die. And of course, that's what the foster parents didn't want. And they didn't want Charlie to begin with. He was just brought to their doorstep and told, hey, you have to take this kid, have him. And that was it. And all of these issues are exposed for what they are. I believe they are meant to rock you to your core. Now, if we take a look at Alexis, looking at her and everything she's gone through, she is an epic hero to her own story. She goes through everything. She has permanent damage from everything she endured. Because what I didn't mention while we were going through everything is that Alexis is blind and deaf on one side. Sorry. But she pushes through it. She goes the extra mile. And not just for herself, she also helps others. We can see that as they're going through the crucible, she does make some friends. She helps them out. She tries to save others, even if it puts her into harm's way. And we even get to take a look at the raw portrayals of what human emotion looks like once you're pushed beyond your breaking point. We see scenes where Alexis goes through her 2 weeks or 4 weeks of being at the crucible, and then she gets her, I think, 2 or 3 days to rest and recuperate. And during that time, she just feels so inadequate and so unable to continue with this that she breaks down and she cries and cries and cries, and she cries to herself by herself in the shower because she has no one to turn to. But after that, she gets back up and she continues to push forward. So throughout this book, I found it to be beyond the 5 stars that I would go for with this book. Just because we rank by 5 stars, I will give it a 5 star. However, for me, if I were to put this into tiers, I would say this would be a god tier book for me. And the writing style itself is a bit different. So in this aspect, not only do we get the usual POV kind of thing explaining what's going on, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, but with Alexis's POV, we also get a lot of inner monologue. We get to see, well, or read, hear, whatever, however you want to describe it. We get a lot of her inner thoughts. And from the characters within this story, my favorite would have to be Nyx, the venomous invisible snake. She is my absolute favorite. Nyx is a mood. I love Nyx. Now, as far as this book goes on its spice content, this book really isn't that spicy. There are other books that are spicier. For me, as far as spice goes, I would give it 1 out of 5 chilies just because I didn't feel like it was that focused on the romantic portion. The main thing that was spicy was like when she's interacting with the sirens. The sirens are very inclined towards being spicy in general. But as far as Alexis goes, it's not that spicy until the very end. So would I recommend this book? Yes, I would recommend it, but I would recommend it to someone who's been in the fantasy genre for a little bit longer. I wouldn't recommend this as a starting out book, mainly because it is essentially a retelling of old Greek mythology. However, there is a little bit of a spin on it. The Greek mythology itself portrayed in this book isn't exactly accurate as far as Greek mythology goes. For example, Hercules in Greek mythology is not a child of Hades and Persephone. Hades and Persephone did not have a child. Hercules was always known as being Zeus's demigod child. So that is one thing. I would be careful with like the Greek mythology and make it mixed up with this contemporary spin-off on it. If you aren't very familiar with it, you could always go and look up the Greek mythology, the gods. That does explain a lot about who they are, what their personalities like, things like that. The world building itself is also a little dense. It's not too bad, but it is intricate. It does have aspects of Greek mythology which can make it confusing, and there are multiple time skips. But these time skips that we'd have are important to the plot. They help move it forward. It makes sense. The time skips make sense. But other than that, other than those recommendations, you are always free to read what you want. These are just my recommendations because of how confusing it can get. I do recommend you read it if you are comfortable with what the trigger warnings say for you. That way we can all have our hearts ripped out and trampled on. Alright, so now we're going to look a little bit at the magic system. I know this is a long one. The magic system in this book, as I mentioned, this book is based around Greek mythology. However, each Spartan, each god, demigod, they all have their own unique power. Now, depending upon what house they're from, they can be Olympian or they can be Chthonic. And their powers, the way they work, the way they're activated, and what they are like depends on which house this is coming from. Spartans overall are more resistant than humans and can withstand more physically. However, the magic system does tend to be pretty straightforward, with the true differences being on how Chthonics and Olympians activate their magic. Olympians feel their power in their head. It's like a euphoria. They feel euphoric. Their powers are usually seen as, I suppose, lighter, more warmly welcoming, things like that. Chthonics, however, their powers are felt in their heart. It is painful. It's not like the euphoria that you feel great. No, it's painful to them. They feel like they're having a heart attack. Their powers are usually perceived as darker, destructive. Their eyes turn blood red when they activate their powers. They are just seen almost as not quite a villain, maybe, I don't know. They aren't seen as villains, but they're also not seen so much as the good guys. They're kind of vicious, which if they have to fight titans, they should be. And then almost all of the Spartans, they have their own animal protector, their own familiar that accompanies them, that protects them, that helps them. There are exceptions, but other than that, the general details are pretty much the same for everybody. I do not happen to have any similar reads for Blood of Hercules. I wish I did, but currently I don't have anything that could even come close or even has like a general idea or anything like that. And if you have made it to the end of this video today, thank you for being here. Drop a dagger emoji down in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe so you can come back when we take a look at Bonds of Hercules, which is book 2. As always, it's been a pleasure having you here today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.